It started as an ordinary Saturday morning, the kind where the world feels impossibly still and you find yourself lingering in bed, wishing the sun would take its time climbing the sky. That was me anyway. My husband, Adam, had already left for the gym, as he always did. The routine man, the dependable man, but something about the silence felt off that day. Or maybe it was me, hyper-aware and restless for no apparent reason. I decided to do what I always did when I couldn't shake a strange feeling: clean. Adam always teased me about my compulsion to organize, but it gave me clarity, a sense of control. That morning, I moved to the bedroom to vacuum, tugging the rug out from under the bed. That's when I saw it. It was folded neatly, like it was meant to be hidden but not forgotten. A single sheet of cream-colored paper, tucked just under the edge of the rug. I don't know why I picked it up or why my fingers trembled as I unfolded it. Maybe I'd read too many mysteries, or maybe I just knew. The words hit me like a slap, each line more shocking than the last. It wasn't just a letter, it was a confession of desire. Explicit and unapologetic, descriptions of stolen kisses and tangled limbs, but most disturbing were the references to places in my house: my kitchen counter, my shower, my bed. I could barely breathe as I read it, my stomach lurching like I'd been punched. The handwriting wasn't mine, but I knew the slanted scrawl. It was my best friend Claire's. My mind raced. Maybe this was old, something from before Adam and I were together, a mistake, a misunderstanding. I wanted to believe that, but the letter felt fresh, the ink sharp and dark against the page. It was undeniable. This was no artifact from the past. It was a declaration, a description of something recent, something real. I stood there, the vacuum still running, staring at the letter like it might vanish if I looked away. My heart thudded in my chest as questions tumbled over each other. Had Adam left it there? Was he so careless? Or had Claire hidden it herself? Why was it here? And why now? I folded the letter and tucked it into my pocket, my hands trembling. The betrayal felt like a ghost in the room, brushing cold fingers against my skin. It was the kind of thing you think only happens to other people. Not me, not in my marriage, not with Claire, who'd held my hand through breakups and tragedies and triumphs. I didn't know what to do. My first instinct was to confront Adam immediately, but something held me back. I needed to understand, to know for sure. That's when the smallest, darkest seed planted itself in my mind. If this was what I feared it was, I wouldn't let them ruin me. I wouldn't cry or crumble. If they thought they could get away with this in my home, they were wrong. So very wrong. I spent the rest of the day in a fog, the letter burning a hole in my pocket. Adam came home, sweaty and full of the kind of smug satisfaction that only comes from a grueling workout. He kissed me on the cheek and muttered something about needing a shower. I nodded, forcing a smile, but my skin crawled when he touched me. How long had it been since I'd looked at him? Really looked at him. He wasn't just my husband anymore. He was a puzzle, one I suddenly wasn't sure I had all the pieces to. I watched him disappear down the hall, the sound of water running moments later, and my chest tightened. I needed answers, but I wasn't ready to ask the questions yet, not without more to go on. The rest of the day was a slow, excruciating dance of pretending. Pretending I wasn't breaking apart inside, pretending I wasn't analyzing his every word, every glance. I hated myself for how easily he moved through the day, oblivious to the storm in my chest. Or maybe he wasn't oblivious. Maybe he just didn't care. By the time we settled in to watch a movie that night, I thought I'd lose my mind. My thoughts swirled like water circling a drain, the letter flashing in my mind like a neon sign. The scenes in the movie blurred together, meaningless. My eyes were on Adam, studying his face in the flickering light of the TV. "Something wrong?" he asked, his voice cutting through my thoughts. I shook my head, forcing a yawn to cover my unease. "No, just tired." He reached over, his hand warm on my thigh. "You've been quiet today." I froze, the weight of his hand unbearable. It was the same hand described in the letter, tracing lines on someone else's skin. My stomach churned, and I pulled away, muttering something about needing water. I fled to the kitchen, clutching the counter as I tried to catch my breath. This wasn't sustainable. I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. I needed to do something, anything, to make sense of this. That night, long after Adam had fallen asleep, I crept back into the bedroom and pulled the letter from its hiding place in my nightstand. I read it again, every word twisting the knife deeper. I searched for clues, anything that would give me a timeline or more details. And then I saw it, a mention of the wardrobe. It was subtle, almost an afterthought, but it was there. The scent of you lingered on the dresses in the wardrobe, intoxicating. My breath caught as I stared at the words. Claire had been in my closet. The next morning, while Adam was in the shower, I searched. My hands shook as I pushed aside dresses and jackets, feeling along the edges of the wardrobe. I didn't even know what I was looking for. Another letter, a keepsake, proof of my unraveling sanity, and then I found it, tucked between two boxes on the top shelf, another piece of folded paper. My heart thundered as I climbed down from the stool and unfolded it. This one was worse, much worse. The second letter wasn't just explicit, it was devastating. Claire's handwriting danced across the page, weaving vivid carnal images that made my stomach twist. Unlike the first letter, this one was a step-by-step chronicle, detailing specific encounters that happened in places I could no longer see as innocent. The kitchen counter where I'd rolled out dough for birthday cakes, the shower where I'd washed away the stress of long days, the bed where I'd dreamed of a life full of trust and love. Her words were alive with sensory detail, like she wanted whoever read it, Adam, I assumed, to relive every touch, every sound. I could practically feel the heat of their betrayal radiating from the paper, and as if that wasn't enough, she signed it with a flourish. Forever yours, C. Forever yours. In my home, in my bed. I felt like the walls were closing in. My throat tightened as tears blurred my vision, but anger burned hotter than sadness. How long had this been going on? How many times had she walked through my front door, smiled at me, laughed with me while carrying the secret? How many times had Adam kissed me goodnight knowing he'd betrayed me hours earlier? I crumpled the letter in my fist, then stopped myself. Evidence. I needed to keep everything intact, no matter how much it hurt to look at. I smoothed it back out and tucked it into the drawer with the first letter. The morning passed in a haze. I went through the motions, making coffee, answering emails, pretending to listen as Adam talked about work. Every word out of his mouth felt like a lie. I kept seeing flashes of the scenes described in the letters, imagining them as vividly as Claire had written them. I hated myself for being so passive, for not storming into the living room and throwing the letters in his face, but I couldn't. Not yet. By lunchtime, my thoughts turned to Claire. Her face kept surfacing in my mind. Her easy smile, the way she'd always leaned in close when she spoke, like every word was just for you. I thought about our last conversation, sitting on my patio with glasses of wine. She'd complimented Adam's cooking, teasing me about how lucky I was to have a husband who knew his way around the kitchen. It hadn't seemed odd then, but now, in hindsight, it felt like a dagger. Had I missed other signs? Little jokes or comments that hinted at something deeper? My memories were suddenly distorted, replaying every interaction with a sinister undertone. I couldn't believe how blind I'd been. That afternoon, while Adam was at work, I went into the closet again. I didn't know what I hoped to find. Another letter? Some tangible proof of their betrayal? Or was I just punishing myself, digging into a wound that already felt fatal? I ran my fingers over the clothes hanging neatly on the rack, pausing when I reached a lacy set of lingerie. It was beautiful, deep red with intricate embroidery, but it wasn't mine. The tag was still on it, and the size was Claire's. The lingerie hung there like a silent accusation, its delicate fabric mocking me. I pulled it off the hanger and held it up, my hands trembling. It was undeniably Claire's size, not mine. I hadn't bought it, and it certainly hadn't been there the last time I cleaned the closet. I sat on the floor, the lingerie in my lap, and stared at the empty space it had occupied. My mind churned with 1,000 scenarios. Had she left it here on purpose? Some sick trophy of her conquest? Or had Adam hidden it, careless enough to think I wouldn't notice? Memories flooded in, sharp and painful. Claire's sly smiles, her too frequent compliments about Adam, the way she always seemed to find a reason to touch him, a hand on his arm, a playful nudge. At the time, I'd chalked it up to her being affectionate, flirty in the harmless way some people are. I'd even laughed about it with Adam once, teasing him about how Claire seemed to have a little crush on him. He'd smiled, but there'd been something behind it. A flicker of discomfort I'd ignored. God, how had I been so blind? I stuffed the lingerie back into the closet and closed the door, pacing the room. My pulse pounded in my ears as the pieces of the puzzle began to snap together. The late nights at work, the way his phone seemed glued to his hand lately, always turned face down when he set it on the table, the tension in his jaw whenever Claire's name came up. It all fit. But the thing that gutted me most was how ordinary they'd made it seem. They'd carried on right under my nose, turning my home into their playground. The intimacy of it was unbearable. This wasn't some faceless fling in a hotel room. It was a violation of everything sacred, my space, my trust, my life. I thought about calling Claire, demanding answers. But what would I say? That I'd found her letters? That I knew about the lingerie? She'd deny it, twist the story, make me doubt myself. I couldn't give her that power. Not yet. Instead, I went to the kitchen and poured a glass of wine, my hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped the bottle. The wine tasted bitter, like my anger had seeped into everything, even my taste buds. I stared out the window at the backyard where we'd hosted barbecues, celebrated birthdays, and laughed together. Me, Adam and Claire. I felt like a fool, a blind, naive fool, but I wasn't going to stay that way. I didn't know what my plan was yet, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let them get away with this. They thought they were clever, that they'd fooled me, but they'd underestimated just how much I could see when I finally opened my eyes. They thought I was weak. They were wrong. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the weight of the letters and the lingerie pressing down on me like a lead blanket. Adam slept soundly beside me, his breathing slow and steady, his hand resting on his stomach. I wanted to shove him awake, to scream at him, to demand the truth, but I stayed silent, letting the darkness swallow my anger. I needed more. I couldn't just march into a confrontation armed with vague suspicions and a pair of panties. I wanted to catch them in the act, not just for proof, but because I wanted them to know I'd outsmarted them. I wanted them to see me, to feel the weight of my fury before I brought their little world crashing down. The next morning, as Adam left for work, I kissed him goodbye. It felt surreal, like I was playing a role in a movie I hated. He smiled at me, completely unaware that I was already plotting his downfall. Once the door closed, I grabbed my laptop and started researching hidden cameras. The idea had come to me the night before, a spark of inspiration in the middle of my sleepless torment. If they were using my house for their little rendezvous, I was going to catch them in the act. The options were overwhelming. Tiny cameras disguised as alarm clocks, picture frames, even air fresheners. I settled on one that looked like a charging dock. It was perfect, inconspicuous enough to blend into our bedroom without drawing attention. I placed the order, paying extra for expedited shipping. With that piece of the plan in motion, I turned my attention to Adam's phone. I'd never been the type to snoop, but desperate times called for desperate measures. That evening, as we sat on the couch watching TV, I waited for him to get up. He always left his phone on the coffee table when he went to the kitchen for snacks. When the moment came, my heart raced. I grabbed his phone and tried to unlock it, but he'd changed his passcode. Of course he had. My stomach twisted with rage as I set it back down, careful not to leave any trace of my attempt. "Want anything?" he called from the kitchen. "No, I'm good," I replied, my voice steady despite the storm brewing inside me. I needed to figure out the new passcode, but I couldn't risk being obvious about it. Instead, I focused on keeping my cool, observing him closely for any clues. Over the next few days, I watched the way he interacted with his phone, noting how quickly he'd swipe away notifications or angle the screen away from me. By the time the hidden camera arrived, I was a bundle of nerves. I installed it that afternoon, positioning it to capture the entire bedroom. As I adjusted it, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror. My reflection startled me. My face was drawn, my eyes shadowed with exhaustion. I barely recognized the woman staring back. This wasn't me. At least it hadn't been, but they'd made me into this. A woman consumed by betrayal and the need for revenge. And I wasn't going to stop until I had it. The hidden camera was my silent accomplice, a little sentinel perched on the nightstand, watching over the room while I went about my days pretending not to know what I knew. I kept Adam's routine firmly in mind as I strategized. He always had a gym session scheduled on Saturday mornings, leaving me a predictable window of time to investigate further. Friday night, I decided to make my move. As we climbed into bed, I played the part of the doting wife, asking about his plans for the next day. He gave me the usual rundown: gym, errands, maybe grabbing a coffee with a colleague. I smiled, nodded, and leaned in to kiss him goodnight, my stomach churning the entire time. The next morning, as soon as he left, I sprang into action. I retrieved the spare key to his office, which he kept in a drawer in the study. It was a gamble. If he'd left anything incriminating in his work files, it wouldn't be here, but it was a place to start. His desk was neat, everything arranged with a precision that felt almost mocking. I opened drawers, flipped through folders, and scrolled through documents on his computer, but nothing stood out. If he was hiding evidence, he wasn't careless about it. Frustrated, I shifted my focus back to his phone. I'd been watching him enter his passcode for days now, memorizing the movements of his fingers. I was sure I had the sequence right. 8-2-3-9. When he got home and eventually left his phone unattended, I grabbed it and entered the code. It unlocked. My heart pounded as I navigated to his messages. The thread with Claire was buried under casual chats with coworkers and family, but when I opened it, I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. The messages weren't just flirtatious. They were intimate, raw, and filled with memories of their time together in my home. "I still think about you pressed against the wardrobe, the way you bit your lip. Next time, let's relive that night in the shower. I can't stop imagining it." I swallowed the lump in my throat and kept scrolling. One message made my breath catch. "Tomorrow morning, 10 a.m. You know the spot. Tomorrow." They had plans here. While I'd been making coffee, folding laundry, and trying to piece my life back together, They'd been planning their next rendezvous under my roof. I snapped pictures of the messages, my hands trembling. Then I set the phone back where I'd found it, my mind racing. The camera was ready. I would have what I needed soon. More than enough to confront them both. But now, a new idea began to take shape. Catching them wasn't enough. I didn't just want them to know I knew. I wanted them to feel the weight of my betrayal. I wanted them to squirm, to wonder how much I'd seen, how much I'd planned. Let the games begin. Saturday morning arrived, and I was a coiled spring of nerves. Adam left for the gym right on schedule, kissing me on the forehead like he hadn't spent the night texting Claire about their plans. I waited until I heard his car pull out of the driveway before I retrieved the hidden camera's live feed on my laptop. The footage was crystal clear. The camera was perfectly positioned to capture anyone who entered the bedroom. I set my laptop aside and paced the kitchen, my thoughts a chaotic mess. Part of me wanted to leave the house to spare myself the pain of watching, but another part, angrier, colder, insisted I stay. I had to see this through. At exactly 10:04 a.m., the front door opened. Claire. She moved through my house with a familiarity that made my skin crawl. Her hair was in a loose bun, her makeup minimal, like she hadn't come here to seduce but to belong. The sight of her set my teeth on edge. She paused in the kitchen, glancing around like she was making sure I wasn't home, then headed straight for the bedroom. I switched back to the live feed, my pulse pounding in my ears. Claire entered the room, her movements unhurried. She sat on the edge of the bed, smoothing the comforter with her hands. The gall of it, her sitting there like it was hers. I bit down on the inside of my cheek, tasting blood. Minutes later, Adam appeared. He must have parked down the street or around the corner. My stomach turned at the sight of him, smiling as he stepped into the room and leaned down to kiss her. They didn't speak, at least not loudly enough for the camera to pick up, but their body language said everything. His hand lingered on her waist, and her fingers curled around his wrist like she'd done it 1,000 times before. I couldn't watch anymore. I slammed the laptop shut and stood there, shaking. They were in my bedroom, my sanctuary, the place where I'd kissed Adam goodnight, whispered dreams about our future, and believed we were happy. I wanted to storm in and end it, but I knew that wouldn't satisfy me. Not yet. They needed to suffer like I was suffering. They needed to feel the weight of what they'd done. I spent the next hour drafting a plan, the outlines of which had been forming in my mind ever since I found the first letter. Catching them in the act was just step one. The real revenge would be slower, more deliberate. After they left, I retrieved the footage from the camera and saved it to a secure folder on my laptop. I watched just enough to ensure it showed what I needed it to: Adam and Claire together, unmistakable in their betrayal. Then I closed the laptop and took a deep, shuddering breath. They thought they'd won, that they'd fooled me, humiliated me, but they had no idea who they were dealing with. That evening, I sat across from Adam at dinner, swirling a fork through my pasta as he chatted about his day. My stomach churned with anger and disgust, but I forced myself to play the part. He didn't notice my silence, too engrossed in recounting a story about a colleague's office drama. The ease with which he lied, sat there, and pretended everything was normal, made my blood boil. I smiled when appropriate, nodded, and even laughed at the right moments. It felt grotesque, like wearing a mask that didn't fit. Beneath the surface, my plan was already in motion. The footage, the screenshots of their texts, they were my weapons. I just needed the right moment to use them. When dinner was over, I poured us each a glass of wine and settled on the couch, pretending to relax. "You've been working out a lot lately," I said casually, glancing at him over the rim of my glass. "I can tell." He smiled, looking pleased with himself. "You think so?" I nodded, letting my gaze linger just long enough to make him squirm. "You're looking fit." His eyes flickered with something. Surprise? Guilt? I couldn't tell. "Well, I've been trying to stay consistent." "Oh, I've noticed," I said, my tone light but edged with something sharper. "You're very disciplined." I didn't miss the way his shoulders stiffened, the brief pause before he took another sip of wine. Good. Let him wonder. Let the seed of doubt take root. Later that night, after Adam had fallen asleep, I opened the messaging app on my phone. I'd spent the afternoon creating a fake social media profile, complete with a believable photo and background. It was a simple but effective ploy. I'd pose as Adam and see just how far Claire would go. I typed out a message, keeping it short and flirtatious. "Thinking about you. Can't wait to see you again. When are you free?" I hesitated for a moment, my finger hovering over the send button. This felt dirty, underhanded, but then I remembered the letters, the texts, the image of them in my bedroom. They'd thrown away any right to fairness or decency. I hit send. The reply came within minutes. "Miss you too. Tomorrow night? Your place?" I stared at the screen, my anger rekindled. Claire didn't even hesitate. No concern, no guilt, just casual eagerness. It was sickening, but it was also exactly what I needed. I continued the conversation, keeping my tone flirty but vague. Claire revealed more than I expected, details about their encounters, about how long they'd been sneaking around. The affair had started years ago, long before Adam and I were married. Worse, it had begun when Claire was still living in this house, my house. The realization hit me like a freight train. The betrayal wasn't just recent. It was woven into the fabric of my life, predating everything I thought I knew. They'd carried the secret through my engagement, my wedding, my honeymoon. Every happy memory was tainted. I saved the messages, my heart pounding. This wasn't just about catching them anymore. This was about reclaiming everything they'd stolen from me. And I was just getting started. Claire's revelation that the affair had begun years ago, when she still lived in my house, shook me to my core. I stared at the messages on my phone, the weight of her words settling heavily on my chest. Your place. It wasn't just a location. It was a timeline, a twisted history I hadn't known I was part of. Back when Claire and I were roommates, the house had been a sanctuary. We'd split the rent, spent countless nights drinking wine on the couch, and shared everything, or so I thought. How many times had I confided in her about Adam, told her how much I liked him in those early, uncertain days? Had she listened to my giddy stories while carrying on with him behind my back? I closed my eyes, memories flooding in. The late nights she'd come home looking flushed, brushing off my questions with vague comments about a new guy, the times Adam had dropped by to pick me up for a date, and lingered a little too long in conversation with her. It had all seemed harmless then. Now it felt like a cruel joke. My anger boiled over into a simmering resolve. They thought they'd gotten away with this, weaving their lies so seamlessly into the fabric of my life. But I wasn't going to be their fool anymore. The next step in my plan required facing Claire directly. I needed to see her, to look her in the eye and hear her lies while knowing the truth. If she thought she could keep up her charade, she was in for a rude awakening. I sent her a text. Hey, miss you. Want to catch up soon? Coffee this week? She replied almost instantly, as if she'd been waiting for me to reach out. Yes. How about tomorrow? Usual spot? Her eagerness made my skin crawl. I agreed, forcing a smile I didn't feel. The usual spot was a cozy cafe downtown, one we'd frequented for years. It had always been our place, a little refuge where we could talk about everything from work drama to our dreams for the future. Now, the thought of sitting across from her made me feel sick. The next day, I arrived at the cafe early, choosing a table near the back where we wouldn't be disturbed. I didn't want anyone overhearing what I planned to say, or noticing if my emotions got the better of me. Claire arrived 10 minutes later, all smiles and warmth. She looked beautiful, as always, her effortless charm on full display. It took everything in me not to recoil when she leaned in to hug me. It's so good to see you, she said, sliding into the seat across from me. It feels like it's been forever. I forced a smile. Yeah, it has. She launched into updates about her job, her recent trip to the coast, her family, everything except Adam. I let her talk, studying her face, her body language, the way she sipped her latte like she didn't have a care in the world. When there was a lull in the conversation, I leaned forward slightly, feigning casual curiosity. Remember when you used to live in my house? She laughed, a nostalgic smile spreading across her face. Of course. Best time of my life. Yeah, I said softly, my gaze sharp. You seemed very comfortable there. Her smile faltered, just for a moment. A flicker of unease passed over her face, but she recovered quickly. Well, you always made it feel like home. It was the first crack in her armor, and I intended to widen it. Claire's quick recovery after my pointed comment only fueled my resolve. She was too good at this, too skilled at hiding her lies behind that disarming smile. But now, I wasn't the clueless friend she thought I was. I was watching her, reading between the lines of every word. I guess it was home, I said, swirling my coffee absent-mindedly. For both of us. You knew that house better than anyone. She tilted her head, her smile cautious. Well, I did live there for years. Why do you ask? Oh, no reason, I replied lightly. I was just thinking about how certain things stick, you know? Like, you ever notice how you remember the smallest details about places you've lived, even years later? Claire hesitated, her fingers tightening slightly around her coffee cup. I guess so. Why? It's funny, I continued, leaning back in my chair. I was rearranging some things in the house the other day, and it got me thinking about all the times we spent together there. All the secrets we probably kept in that house. Her smile froze just a little. Secrets? You know, silly stuff, I said, waving a hand dismissively. Like that time you snuck that guy in after a party and thought I didn't notice. She laughed, her tension easing. Oh my God, I forgot about that. You caught me red-handed. I smiled, my stomach twisting. I guess some secrets are easier to hide than others. Her eyes flickered with something. Wariness, maybe? She didn't respond right away, instead taking a long sip of her coffee. I let the silence stretch, enjoying the way it unsettled her. "So," I said finally, breaking the quiet, "how's your love life these days?" The question hung in the air like a trap. Claire blinked, clearly caught off guard. "Oh, the usual. A couple of bad dates. Nothing serious." "Really?" I said, raising an eyebrow. "No one special?" She shook her head, her smile strained. "Nope. Just me, myself, and I." Liar. I decided to press a little further. "Well, if you ever need advice, you know I'm always here. Adam and I have had our ups and downs, but we've worked through them." I leaned in slightly, lowering my voice. "It's amazing what a marriage can survive, don't you think?" Claire's face paled, her smile faltering again. Yeah, totally." The conversation limped along after that, Claire visibly uncomfortable but trying to hide it. She kept glancing at her phone, her usual easy chatter replaced with forced laughter and short answers. She knew something was off, but she didn't know how much I knew. That uncertainty was my weapon, and I wielded it carefully. By the time we finished our coffee, Claire looked like she couldn't wait to leave. She hugged me goodbye, her embrace stiff and awkward, and promised to text me soon. I smiled, watching her walk away, her shoulders tense. She didn't know it yet, but I'd just started pulling the strings, and soon her whole world would unravel. When Claire walked away from the cafe, her usual confidence fractured. I felt the first flicker of satisfaction. It wasn't much, but it was a start. She was beginning to sense that something wasn't right, and I intended to stoke that paranoia until it consumed her. That evening, I decided to test the waters with Adam. I'd already planted seeds of doubt in Claire. Now it was his turn. My goal wasn't confrontation yet, but rather to rattle him, to let him feel the edges of the trap closing around him. I planned a romantic dinner. It wasn't unusual. I'd always enjoyed cooking, and Adam liked the occasional surprise. This time, though, there was a purpose behind every detail. The wine I chose was the same one we'd served at our wedding. The playlist in the background was full of songs from the early days of our relationship. I wore the dress he'd once called his favorite, the one I hadn't touched in years. He walked through the door and stopped in his tracks, the scent of roasted garlic and herbs filling the air. "What's all this?" he asked, his smile hesitant. "Just wanted to do something special," I said, brushing past him to set the table. "It's been a while since we had a proper date night." His eyes lingered on me, a flicker of confusion passing over his face. "You look amazing," I smiled, playing the part. "You're sweet. Go wash up. Dinner's almost ready." Over the course of the meal, I wove subtle comments into our conversation, each one designed to chip away at his composure. I talked about trust, about how important it was in a marriage, about how devastating it could be to lose it. Adam shifted in his seat, his movements growing stiffer as the night went on. I saw it in the way he gripped his wineglass, the way his smile tightened when I mentioned how much I appreciated his loyalty. By dessert, he was practically squirming. "You seem tense," I said, tilting my head as I watched him. "Everything okay?" "Yeah, of course," he said quickly. Too quickly. "Just tired. Long day." I leaned forward, resting my chin on my hand. "You'd tell me if something was wrong, wouldn't you?" "Of course," he said, his voice a little too loud. "Why wouldn't I?" "Just checking," I said lightly, leaning back in my chair. "You know I'd never keep anything from you." The tension in the room was almost palpable. Adam excused himself shortly after, muttering something about needing to catch up on emails. I stayed at the table, sipping my wine and letting the satisfaction wash over me. He was cracking, just like Claire. They could feel the walls closing in, even if they didn't know why. But I wasn't done yet. Not even close. The cracks I'd carefully started to chip into their confidence were growing wider, but it wasn't enough. I wanted them both on edge, questioning every decision, every word, every glance. It was time to escalate. That week, I began planting subtle reminders around the house. I wasn't reckless. I wanted these traces to be just ambiguous enough to make Adam wonder but not outright panic. I started with the lingerie I'd found in the closet. Instead of tucking it back where I'd discovered it, I hung it in plain view on the back of the bedroom door. The morning Adam saw it, his reaction was almost comical. I pretended not to notice as he froze in the doorway, his gaze fixed on the lacy red fabric. "When did you get that?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. "Oh, that?" I said, feigning casual indifference as I slipped earrings on. "I thought it was yours." His head snapped toward me, his face blanching. "What do you mean?" I shrugged, my tone light. "It's not my size. Must have been a gift from someone else." The blood drained from his face, and for a moment I thought he might actually confess. But then he recovered, forcing a laugh. "You're hilarious." I smiled sweetly. "I try." The lingerie was just the beginning. Over the next few days, I moved the letters I'd found, placing them in areas Adam frequented, on his desk, under his pillow, tucked into the pages of his favorite book. I made sure he couldn't miss them, but acted completely unaware whenever he stiffened or glanced at me nervously. I also began rearranging things in the house. Subtly but meaningfully, I moved the vase of flowers in the kitchen to the exact spot Claire had described in one of her letters, just to see if Adam would notice. When I caught him staring at it during dinner, his fork hovering mid-air, I knew I was getting to him. Claire wasn't safe from my games either. I sent her a cryptic text from the fake account I'd created, posing as Adam. "Do you think she knows?" Her reply came almost instantly. "No way. She'd never suspect us." I could practically hear the smugness in her tone, and it made my blood boil. I responded carefully, "I don't know. She's been acting different." Her reply was slower this time. "What do you mean? Like she knows something. Has she said anything to you?" Not a word. She was totally normal when we had coffee. My anger flared at the mention of our cafe meeting. How dare she sit across from me, lying through her teeth? I typed my response with calculated precision. "Just be careful. She's smarter than you think." The conversation ended there, but I knew it had done its job. Claire was rattled. By the end of the week, I could feel the tension between her and Adam growing. They were avoiding each other. Avoiding me, too. Like two mice caught in the same trap, scrambling for escape. Good. Let them squirm. The culmination of my plan began to take shape as I prepared for a family gathering that weekend. It was Adam's idea, a way to relax after what he claimed was a stressful week. The irony wasn't lost on me. He didn't realize he was organizing his own undoing. I spent Friday night assembling everything I needed: the letters, the screenshots of their texts, and the footage from the hidden camera. I arranged them into a folder on my laptop and created a slideshow. The final touch was syncing it to the smart TV in the living room, the one we used to display family photos at gatherings. I tested it once, watching the images flash across the screen in sequence. Claire's handwriting, her messages, their bodies tangled together in my bed. It was perfect. Saturday arrived, and the house filled with the warm chaos of family, laughter, chatter, clinking glasses. I played my part flawlessly, hosting with the ease of someone who didn't have a single care in the world. Adam moved through the crowd with his usual charm, but I saw the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes darted toward me when he thought I wasn't looking. Claire arrived late, as she often did, gliding through the door with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I greeted her warmly, hugging her tightly enough to feel her stiffen. "I'm so glad you're here," I said, my voice dripping with sincerity. "We've missed you." She gave a nervous laugh, stepping back to scan the room. "Looks like a great turnout." "Oh, it's going to be unforgettable," I said, smiling to myself. The evening wore on, the usual rhythm of drinks and stories and laughter filling the house. I waited until everyone was settled in the living room, clustered around the TV as Adam queued up the photo slideshow. "I thought I'd add a little surprise this time," I said casually, taking the remote from him. "Some memories I thought we'd all enjoy." Adam's smile faltered, his eyes narrowing slightly. Claire shifted in her seat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. They could feel it coming, even if they didn't know exactly what. I pressed play. The first few images were innocuous enough: family photos, snapshots from vacations, a birthday party or two. Then, seamlessly, the slideshow transitioned. Claire's first letter appeared on the screen, her handwriting unmistakable. The room went silent, the jovial atmosphere evaporating in an instant. Someone cleared their throat awkwardly. What's this?" I didn't answer. The slideshow continued, cycling through the texts, the lingerie, and finally, the footage from the hidden camera. Gasps erupted as the video played, the grainy but undeniable image of Adam and Claire locked in an embrace filling the screen. Adam leapt to his feet, his face a mask of horror. "What the hell, Emily?" I stood, the remote in my hand, my heart pounding. "What's wrong, Adam? Don't like seeing the truth?" Claire looked like she might faint, her face pale, her mouth opening and closing soundlessly. The room buzzed with whispers and sharp intakes of breath as the betrayal unfolded in front of our family and friends. You planned this," Adam stammered, his voice shaking with anger and disbelief. I smiled, a cold, sharp edge to it. "Of course I did. Did you think you could destroy my life and walk away unscathed? Think again." The silence that followed was deafening, the weight of their humiliation hanging in the air, and for the first time in weeks I felt powerful. The room was electric with tension, the kind that makes every second feel impossibly long. Adam stood frozen, his face a cocktail of rage and panic, while Claire looked like she might disintegrate into the couch. Around us, murmurs and whispers filled the space as friends and family processed what they'd just witnessed. I turned toward the crowd, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. "I'm sorry to hijack the evening like this," I said, keeping my tone sharp but controlled. But I thought it was important for everyone to see the truth. Emily, this isn't the time, Adam hissed, his voice low and venomous. We can talk about this in private. I turned to him, my gaze slicing through his flimsy attempt at control. Oh, now you want privacy? Interesting, because you didn't seem to care about privacy when you were sneaking around with Claire. Gasps rippled through the room. A few people tried to look away, clearly uncomfortable, but most stayed glued to the unfolding drama. Some part of me felt a pang of guilt for dragging everyone into it, but that feeling was drowned out by the satisfaction of watching Adam and Claire squirm. Claire finally found her voice, though it trembled with fear. Emily, please, this isn't what it looks like. Stop! I snapped, my voice cutting through her feeble attempt at denial. Don't you dare insult my intelligence any more than you already have. I have the letters, the texts, the footage. This isn't some misunderstanding, Claire. It's years of betrayal. Her mouth opened, then closed, no excuse forthcoming. She shrank back into her seat, her cheeks flushed with shame. Adam stepped forward, his hands raised in a placating gesture. Emily, save it, I said, my tone icy. You don't get to spin this, not here, not now. This is the reality you created, own it. The weight of my words seemed to crush him. He lowered his hands, his shoulders slumping under the scrutiny of everyone around him. For once, he had no comeback, no excuse, just silence. I let the moment stretch, savoring the sight of him finally realizing how thoroughly I'd dismantled his lies. Then, turning back to the group, I said, I want to thank everyone for coming tonight. I know this isn't what you expected, but I thought it was important to set the record straight. I won't be staying in this house or this marriage any longer. With that, I picked up the folder containing copies of the evidence and walked toward the door. My heart raced as I moved, but my steps were steady. For weeks, I'd felt powerless, trapped in the wreckage of their betrayal. Now, I was the one in control. As I reached the door, I paused, glancing back over my shoulder. Adam and Claire stood side by side, their faces pale and stricken. For a brief moment, I considered saying more, twisting the knife just a little deeper, but I didn't need to. The damage was already done. I opened the door, letting the cold night air wash over me, and walked out. The sound of the door closing behind me felt final, like the sealing of a chapter I never wanted to revisit. I stood on the porch for a moment, letting the cool air steady me. My heart pounded, my body thrumming with adrenaline, but beneath the chaos was an unshakable calm. I had done it. I had exposed them both in the most public, humiliating way possible. Still, I wasn't finished. In the days following the party, I turned my attention to the people who mattered most in Claire's world. Friends, colleagues, the carefully curated social circle she had spent years building. I sent anonymous emails containing excerpts of the letters and texts, each one accompanied by a simple message. This is the person you think you know. The fallout was immediate. Mutual friends began texting me, their messages laced with disbelief and sympathy. Some apologized for not noticing the signs, while others expressed outright disgust at Claire's behavior. One of her closest work friends called me, her voice tinged with anger. I can't believe she would do this to you. To anyone. Neither Claire nor Adam reached out during this time, though I knew they were both feeling the full weight of the exposure. I didn't block their numbers. I wanted them to sit in their silence, to know that I was always one step ahead of them. And then there was social media. I didn't need to post anything directly. The whispers had already spread. People pieced the story together from vague posts and the absence of Claire in any of our shared spaces. Within a week, her accounts were noticeably quieter, her once perfect image fractured beyond repair. Adam, too, was unraveling. He tried reaching out to some of our friends, but the sympathy he expected wasn't there. Instead, he found polite but firm walls, people unwilling to involve themselves in the mess he had created. His professional reputation took a hit as well. Word of his indiscretions spread among colleagues, making him a topic of office gossip. I didn't revel in their misery, at least not outwardly, but privately, I allowed myself small moments of satisfaction. For every sleepless night I'd spent crying, for every moment I'd questioned my worth, they were now living their own versions of hell. Still, my focus wasn't entirely on them. This was about reclaiming my life, not just dismantling theirs. I started the process of filing for divorce, ensuring every step was deliberate and airtight. Adam wouldn't get a single chance to manipulate his way out of this, and I made sure of that with the help of a brilliant attorney who shared my determination. The house, once a sanctuary that had been turned into a prison, was next on my list. I packed what mattered, selling or donating the rest. The final step was finding a new place to call home, a fresh start, free of the ghosts of Adam and Claire's betrayal. The day I handed over the keys to the real estate agent, I stood in the empty living room and let myself feel the weight of it all, the pain, the anger, the loss. I didn't push it away. I let it wash over me, knowing that this moment of closure was necessary. When I walked out of the house for the last time, I didn't look back. Moving forward felt like learning how to breathe again. I rented a small but charming apartment on the other side of town, far enough away from the house and everything tied to it. The space was bright and open, a blank canvas for the life I was building anew. It wasn't just a place to live, it was a promise to myself. The first few weeks were a strange mix of freedom and grief. I woke up each morning feeling lighter, unshackled from the lies and betrayal. But there were moments when the memories crept in, quietly, insidiously, reminding me of what I'd lost. Not just Adam, but the version of myself who had trusted so deeply, so unconditionally. Still, I kept moving forward. Claire's life, on the other hand, was unraveling rapidly. I heard through mutual friends that she had taken a leave of absence from work after someone forwarded the emails to her boss. Her carefully maintained image had crumbled, leaving her isolated. Every time I thought about her sitting alone in her apartment, her phone silent, I felt a grim sense of justice. Adam wasn't faring much better. He'd tried reaching out once, a text that simply read, "Can we talk? Please." I didn't respond. He called a week later. I let it go to voicemail. His voice sounded raw, desperate, as he said he just wanted to explain. But what was left to explain? I'd seen everything I needed to see, heard all the lies in his silence, and read the truth in Claire's handwriting. I deleted the voicemail without listening to it twice. One evening, as I sipped wine on my new balcony, I received a message from an old mutual friend. She'd run into Claire at the grocery store. According to her, Claire had looked like a shadow of herself, disheveled, distant, and humiliated. For the first time, I didn't feel anger or satisfaction. I felt nothing. She was no longer part of my story, no longer a weight dragging me down. I'd left her behind, just like I'd left Adam. As for me, I started focusing on things I hadn't allowed myself to enjoy during the last few years of my marriage. I enrolled in a painting class, something I'd always wanted to do but never prioritized. I reconnected with old friends, ones who'd been pushed to the periphery during my relationship. I began going on long walks every morning, the cool air and sunlight a soothing balm for my restless mind. Each small step felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. One day, while unpacking the last box in my apartment, I found the letters and screenshots I'd saved. I sat on the floor, staring at the stack of evidence that had once consumed my every waking thought. The anger I'd felt when I first found them was gone, replaced by a calm resolve. I placed the letters in the shredder, watching as the machine chewed through the paper, turning Claire's words into meaningless confetti. The screenshots went next, deleted from my laptop and phone. The files didn't need to exist anymore. I didn't need them anymore. This was my life now, free, unburdened, and finally, mine. The first day I truly felt free was a sunny Saturday morning. I woke up to sunlight streaming through the curtains of my new apartment, the sound of birdsong drifting in through the open window. There were no knots in my stomach, no nagging questions clawing at my mind, just peace. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was waiting for something to fall apart. I made myself a cup of coffee and sat on the balcony, letting the warmth of the mug seep into my hands. The city stretched out before me, alive and buzzing, and for once it felt like I was part of it again. Not a spectator or a woman trapped in a life that didn't feel like her own, but someone with purpose, someone with hope. I thought about the version of myself who had first found the letter under the rug, how she'd been so desperate for answers, so consumed by the betrayal, that she could barely breathe. She felt like a different person now, someone I could look back on with compassion, but no desire to return to. I was no longer that woman. There was no final confrontation with Adam, no dramatic showdown where I laid everything bare. There didn't need to be. The last thing I wanted was to carry his voice or his presence into the future I was building. Silence was more powerful, final. I knew he was struggling, trying to make sense of what had happened and how he had lost control. That was enough. Claire, too, was a shadow in my past, her presence reduced to a faint echo. I didn't know if she'd ever reach out, and I didn't care. If she did, I would ignore her, just as I had Adam. They belonged to a chapter I had already closed. Instead, I focused on what was ahead. I started journaling, filling pages with thoughts, dreams, and plans for the future. The act of putting pen to paper felt cleansing, like I was untangling the chaos that had once filled my mind. I wrote about the things that mattered to me, the things I wanted to pursue, the kind of life I wanted to live. One evening, on a whim, I attended a local gallery opening. I didn't know anyone there, but that was part of the appeal. I wandered through the space admiring the paintings and sculptures, the way each piece seemed to carry its own story. By the end of the night, I'd struck up a conversation with the artist, a warm, soft-spoken man named Caleb. He was kind, thoughtful, and genuinely interested in hearing about my painting class. We exchanged numbers, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt a spark of excitement. But this time there was no rush, no desperate need to define what came next. I wasn't looking for someone to fill a void or patch up old wounds. I was whole on my own, and anything, or anyone, else would simply be a bonus. As the days turned into weeks, I found myself smiling more, laughing more, living more. The pain of betrayal was still there, but it no longer defined me. It was a scar, not a wound, a reminder of what I'd endured and overcome. I was free to create, to explore, to love again, not just others, but myself. And for the first time in years, that was more than enough.